In January of 1901, my great-grandfather's first automaking venture, the Detroit Automobile Company, was dissolved. It was a crushing defeat for Henry Ford. He was 38 years old, and he was broke. To make ends meet, he moved his family, himself, his wife Clara, and their 7-year-old son Etzel, in to live with his father. If he wanted to start another car company, and he did, then he needed to find a fresh source of capital. He needed to put himself back in the public eye. To do that, he turned to racing. Racing grabbed the public imagination, and it just so happened that one of the biggest races in the country was being planned practically in Henry Ford's backyard. On October 10th, 1901, the Detroit Driving Club was hosting a nationally advertised 25-lap event at the Grosse Pointe Blue Ribbon horse racing track. The icing on the cake was that Alexander Winton, motor racing's first American superstar, would be entering the race. Winton was everything Henry Ford hoped to be. He was a successful automaker, and his Winton motor carriages were the best-selling gasoline-fueled passenger cars in America. He was the best driver in America. If he entered a race, the assumption going in was that he would win. He was also just a bit of a dilettante. When Winton's sales manager was approached about the Detroit race, he was less than enthusiastic. The grand prize of $1,000 for the win was a small fortune in its day, but not enough to guarantee the presence of America's greatest driver. Finally, Winton's manager struck a deal. They would participate, but only if Winton got to pick out the trophy ahead of time. The driving club agreed, and Winton selected a magnificent cut-glass punch bowl, which he thought would look just perfect in the bay window of his elegant Cleveland home. With Winton signed on to win the event, the success of the race was ensured. All of the financial elite of Detroit would be in the stands. The courthouse would even be closed for the day so the lawyers could attend. Henry Ford realized that if he could put up a good show in front of such a prosperous crowd, he just might have a chance of getting back into the auto business. So, with just a few months in which to do it, my great-grandfather assembled a small team and built a car. It stood high off the ground on 28-inch wheels and looked like a cross between an oversized baby carriage and a small grand piano. There was no windshield, and its driver was exposed to the elements from the ankles on up. No matter what angle you viewed it from, it looked half-finished. But it had an elegant name. They called it Sweepstakes. Being a mechanical engineer, Henry Ford concentrated on the powertrain. The engine had only 2 cylinders, but a displacement of 538 cubic inches. That's 180 more than what NASCAR would allow today. It used a complicated form of mechanical fuel injection, known as a vaporizer. But despite those impressive specs, it produced a mere 26 horsepower. That was considerably less than the 40 horsepower motors common on most race cars of the day. Henry Ford was fine with that. What he was after was reliability. 110 years ago, race cars were driven by 2-man crews, and the second crew member was the mechanic, responsible for fixing the car, often on the fly, when it threatened to break down. The Achilles heel of engines of that day was usually the ignition, and Henry Ford had designed his system around a new form of spark coil, using an insulator built to his specifications by a local dentist and made from denture ceramic. It really was a precursor of the modern-day spark plug. I don't think it was ever Henry Ford's intention to win the race. Since he couldn't afford to hire anyone, he was going to have to drive his own car. He had never gone racing before, and he was up against the greatest driver in the country. Winning under those conditions would be unthinkable. Speed trials conducted on the public streets of Detroit showed that Sweepstakes topped out at 72 miles an hour, 6 miles faster than the automotive speed record at the time. Henry Ford realized that he actually had a hope of winning in October, if only he could figure out what to do with all that speed. So he asked a local bicycle racer to give him pointers on how to apex through a turn. When the day of the great race came, 8,000 spectators packed the grandstands and lined the fences of the track. 13 teams were entered from Detroit alone, but the star of the field was Alexander Winton, who'd brought his best car, powered by a 70-horsepower engine. The promoters had planned a full day of racing, which was probably a bad idea, because by the time the main event came around, only Winton, my grandfather, and one other competitor were running well enough to drive under their own power to the starting line. The driving club decided at the last minute to change the feature from a 25-lap endurance race to a 10-lap sprint. The starting gun was fired, and Winton, as expected, took an early lead. But Sweepstakes, while less powerful, was also considerably lighter than its competitors, and it began to catch up. By the 7th lap, Henry Ford was hot on Alexander Winton's tail. And then on the 8th lap, it happened. Winton's car began to sputter and misfire. As the pair came off the 4th turn and hurtled down the front straight, Henry Ford made the pass and put Alexander Winton in his dust. It was a thrilling moment. It was an historic moment, a moment that identified Ford as a winner worth watching, and it scared the living daylights out of my great-grandfather. After he drove into the winner's circle, into a great crowd of spectators, willing to back him in any venture that involved wheels, the first words out of his mouth were, "Never again." The promoters presented him with his $1,000 check. Then they brought him out the trophy and handed him the elegant cut glass punch bowl. Picture that. Henry Ford looked at that bowl in his hands. He knew the story behind it and knew how much Alexander Winton desired it. The man had picked it out specifically for a place of honor in his home. And Winton was standing right there, watching the victory ceremonies. So knowing how very much that beautiful punch bowl meant to his rival, my great-grandfather did what any racing professional worth his salt would do. He took it home and smiled every time he looked at it for the next 46 years.